Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to everyone joining us from wherever you are. Hopefully you find yourself in the right webinar, but just so you're sure, this is the AI in Insurance Revolution or Hype event, hosted by Insurance Times in association with the lovely people from ExploreAI. I'm Yanis Katoulis, acting editor at Insurance Times, and I'm joined by an accomplished panel of experts on the topic du jour, which is AI in the insurance sector. Today, we'll be exploring the essential question for any new technology around whether it represents a revolution in how our sector operates or whether it's all just hype. Over the last year, the industry's interest in AI has exploded alongside with most of the rest of the world. But the technology presents some really valuable use cases right across the insurance value chain. With its potential impact so significant and varied, we're hoping to demystify some of the nomenclature and separate out some of the noise to provide some actionable insight for all of you today. As always, the best way to do this is with reference to use cases, with evidence of how these have generated real benefits for companies. So, with that, I'd like to allow the panel to introduce themselves. Would you like to kick us off, DB?
Thanks, Yanis. Hi all, I'm Dewald, or better known as DB. So I work for ExploreAI. My background is actuarial science. I'm a qualified actuary, and I've spent the last 7 years of my life, I guess, in the AI and data world. I'm currently operating as a director of AI solutions, and sort of responsible for leading the delivery of building these AI and data solutions for ExploreAI in the insurance sector specifically.
Great, thank you. What about you, David?
Thanks, Yanis. Yep, David Carmolt. I've been with Explore all of 9 months, but my background is 24 odd years within capital markets, so bond origination and structuring, where most of my clients were banks, insurance companies, and super sovereign governments. So bring an understanding of the client base, relationships, regulatory challenges, and use cases to what is, a very well-developed data science AI platform in Explore. Great,
thank you. And AK?
Thanks, Yanis. Hi, everyone. I'm AK. I'm a director in EY, and I lead the advanced analytics work for our financial services customers. So a lot of experience in using AI, using machine learning, and transitioning, businesses from leveraging more and more data in their business processes. Yeah, glad to be here.
Great, thank you very much for joining us all. Just a little bit of logistics before we get started then, but for everybody signed on today, please don't feel like, even though you are a faceless face to us, that you can't engage with us. There is a Q&A capability at the bottom of the Zoom webinar, and if you hear something throughout the discussion that you are yearning to have an answer to, please just send in the questions as and when you have them, and we will do our best to answer them. We will leave some time for Q&As at the end, but we'll try and weave in anything that you think is super relevant to the discussion as we have it. So without further ado, why don't we kick off with some discussion of what has actually spurred the sudden interest in AI in insurance over the past year. How about you, DB? Would you like to speak to that to start with?
Yeah, so I think, AI has been around for decades, right? But I think the real sudden interest in Gen AI is mainly due to two reasons. The first one is advances in tech and algorithms, and the second one being ChatGPT. So I think with the advances in tech and algorithms, the main contributor there is in 2017, where the introduction of the transformers architecture, which is a deep learning architecture, and was really sort of instrumental for setting Gen AI up for the success that it is, I guess, experiencing. But that alone was never enough. It was that in combination with the increase in data being generated, being accessible and also the increase in computing power. And with that combination, sort of just capable to train these massive models on these vast amounts of data sets. So that's from the tech and algorithm side. And then secondly, I think with ChatGPT, it's probably the first time that the public has been granted access to Gen AI in such a simple and user-friendly interface. And it's just allowed millions of people to interact with it, with this technology, and I guess sort of sharing experiences, and led to this marketing boom of what is Gen AI.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's certainly burst onto the scene quite effectively. I mean, AK, I wondered whether you could speak maybe to the advances in the actual technology that have allowed that kind of boom over the last year as well.
Yeah, no, I think everything that Devi said, I think that's just like spot on, right? But one more thing to add is all this while I've been in data industry for 20 years, the biggest challenge has been, hey, as an enterprise, my data is not good enough. It's not good quality. It's not accessible. It's not available. And all of those things have started to change with the cloud and with more awareness, with data awareness and data functions that are being built in the companies. But the biggest change that happened last 9 months or a year was this introduction of pre-trained models, which now immediately lowers the bar massively, right? Because now you don't need to train the model with all of your data from scratch. It's pre-trained and it's available, like Devi said, on a really nice UI for everyone to use. And it provides a really massive step forward of what couldn't be done, a year ago. Now it's like so many possibilities have opened up.
Yeah, I think the opportunity for the insurance sector has become quite clear over the past year or so. I mean, David, maybe you could add to this conversation around where the investment from the kind of financial services and specifically insurance industry has come to kind of prompt some of that move as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, piggybacking on DB's comments, whilst the technology has been around for some time, I think if you are a CTO or a CDO attempting to get funding for digital transformation or use of AI in the business, that in the past has been quite challenging because you're clearly competing with other budget constraints. I think because of this explosion in the public consciousness, that clearly has been bled into the C-suite, into the CFO, the CEOs, and meant that they are beginning to ask their teams, what is this stuff? Why is it suddenly seemingly arrived? Is it transformational for my business? And what is hype and what is myth and what is the reality? So I think from a general corporate perspective, there's a lot more willingness at the C-suite to engage in some of these discussions and to think about how money can be spent, albeit in a way that there is a clear return on investment. But I think for the insurance sector specifically, it's becoming very clear that across the entire insurance value chain, whether you're talking about risk pricing, underwriting, reserving, intelligent chatbots, fraud detection, there's a raft of use cases that are beginning to percolate through that senior folks within firms are recognizing and tasking their teams with investigating more fully.
Okay, that's really interesting that you mentioned about, when you go in to speak to decision makers at insurance companies, David, and I wonder whether you could pick this back up very quickly. It's just, what are when you go in to speak to these decision makers at insurance firms, what are the questions that you're being asked?
I mean, it depends massively on where they are in their own digital journey. So there's a huge spectrum. And often what we find is going in and workshopping with clients is the best way to find out where they are on that spectrum.
Yeah.
And they may start very much from what is AI? What's the difference between good data science, AI, machine learning, deep learning, all the way through to we arrive and they already have a detailed sense as to which use cases they want to think about. And then it's all about how do we take a use case from theoretically possible to actually what are the steps to implementation? What does the wireframe look like? And what does a timetable look like for the execution? So I would say that's one end. And the most common question we often get, and it doesn't matter whether it's insurance companies, banks, payment firms, is what are my peer group doing? There's anyone within the industry is constantly looking left and right, wondering whether they're missing a trick, whether a peer is going to overtake them because they're using a technology which they haven't looked at too closely. So I would say those two things are probably the most common.
Okay, it's quite clear then from that there's a competitive element to the adoption of AI, and that's coming through quite strongly. But did you have anything to add from your perspective there with EY? Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, what David just said, I mean, that's basically what we hear, what I hear when I go meet with C-level, C-1, C-2. Everyone's asking like what's happening rest of the market. I think it's an interesting time in the sense of macroeconomics right now. And that is definitely playing on everyone's mind. Like, everyone's more focused on cost and expense ratio. And I say everyone, I mean CFOs and CIOs especially are really focused on how can I tame that? And how can this technology really help me gain massively in that field? Because everyone has to report their expense ratios, and that's the top of priority these days. And financing being tough, money not being that loose in the market, that's the first thing everyone's thinking about.
Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, what you might perhaps expect when you talk about the advantages of AI is that it can provide this quite significant cost saving if deployed effectively. But I mean, I guess that's the crux of it, isn't it, AK? That, well, I mean, it depends on what areas of investigation insurance companies are actually speaking to you about when they're talking about AI. I mean, when you're speaking to these clients, are there any specific areas that they're trying to focus on with this implementation, or are there some that maybe people should be focusing on that they aren't?
Yeah, I think almost hands down the most important area everyone's focused on when it comes to cost and expense ratio is claims. In terms of insurance, it will be claims and claims automation, complaints, anything to do with the customer where there's a lot of processing and information exchange required. It's a sweet spot for generative AI because that's exactly what it's been pre-trained for. That's exactly what you can fine-tune it for, is how do you streamline and completely rethink your information exchange processes in claims, in chatbots, customer support, and even in personalization of how do you personalize what you're talking to a customer about in a way that it doesn't look like robotic and it doesn't look, it's just like someone reading off a script. And that's really where Gen AI can play a really good role because it brings that really out of the box. So we're hearing that constantly. Claims, complaints, customer care, and things of that nature. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, I wondered if you could just very quickly just expand on that personalization aspect of AI. I mean, could you give a potential example of where that's helped in the past?
Yeah. So personalization is really broad term. It basically what it means is how do you talk to a customer about their specific needs, about what they have recently transacted with you, and what they've been asking you about. All of these data signals are available in your enterprise systems, right? They're all across from your care system, IVR, your complaints, your claims, your notes. And putting all of that together is a monumental task on a customer by customer basis. If you think about if you and I are sitting behind a contact center, for us to read through those notes and think about what should I say to my customer is a big ask. But automating that and providing a simple tool or a simplistic tool that I can use as an agent that allows me to summarize my customer's last, let's say, 1 year of journey with my company, that's a real value add, and that's helps me personalize my interaction with my customers. So that's just one example, and that can be then extrapolated to email. What are you sending your customers? What templates you're sending? How can you personalize that with what the customer has recently done, and so on. So many different venues open up as soon as you start looking at all of your data available and using Gen AI to create personalized content out of that you can use in contact center, emails, and so on.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really vital example of how this technology can actually, not seem too technological, but actually feel more personal for customers. And I think that's a really vital advantage. I mean, that's maybe a customer focused example of how AI can benefit insurance companies. But DB, I wanted to come to you maybe and ask about how AI can help the business processes and the risk collection aspect of insurance for firms.
Yeah, I think completely agree with AK. I mean, I think the focus recently, especially with the Gen AI wave, has been in cost saving and automation. I think about 5 years or so ago, like there was a big focus on smart pricing and underwriting, and that's sort of taken a slight back seat the last few years, but still very much on the cards of areas where it is being applied. Of course, underwriting and pricing being one of the core places of an insurance company. You need to make sure you write good risks and price for them appropriately. And we're slowly seeing a move away from the pooling of risks to actually pricing for individual risks, which has been largely led by just all the vast amount of data that are out there. Of course, the moving from pooling to individual risks is also very different by insurance class. And I guess this additional data, for example, with all the wearables that's collecting data, tracking devices, non-traditional sources like social media, all of those data sources are being used in the pricing and risk selection process. And if you use that in combination with the conventional models, like the linear models, that's been used historically, you don't always get sort of account for those non-linear relationships between the data that exists. And therefore, I guess sort of ML comes to, or machine learning and deep learning to the rescue, and sort of using that in combination with, I guess, this vast amount of data to very accurately price for your risks. Having said that, there's been a bit of a reluctance to do this as well, mainly due to the sort of the black box nature of these models. And that's been led, I guess, by the sort of regulators, by sort of the chief risk officers. But what we're seeing also recently is the explainability of these black box models are drastically increasing. Are ways to really see exactly how these models are working under the hood, and know exactly what the effect of your risk factors are to the actual prediction of the price or the risk. So with that being said, it's probably not used in underwriting and pricing as much as you would expect,
right.
But because of the explainable AI methodologies that are sort of on the forefront, I expect to see a lot more of this going forward.
Great. There's certainly seems to my mind anyway to be opportunities there, especially in terms of compliance, when you can really explain those decisions that you've made. I mean, I wanted to come to you, David, and maybe ask about, talking about opportunities where there are use cases perhaps that AI hasn't been yet deployed, because we've talked about the customer engagement and the underwriting advantages, but are there other opportunities there?
I mean, it's a good question. I think the opportunities that the guys I don't think have mentioned, but are definitely there, are utilization of large language models trained on internal data that help call center staff, online staff deal with questions in a much more accurate and nuanced and personalized way. So not always external chatbots, but almost an internal reference. I think what's quite interesting as well is where we're not really seeing it being utilized. And this is clearly a sweeping generalization, but within the insurance clients that we speak to, I would say very few are looking at the adoption of AI for the purposes of either writing new business lines, which they haven't been writing before and is not necessarily currently in their wheelhouse, or moving into new jurisdictions, new territories, which they don't cover already. So coming back to a point AK was making, it tends to be much more focused on how can I take cost out of the system, rather than how do I use AI to necessarily massively expand my jurisdiction or asset class reach.
Okay, I mean, could you maybe expand on that potential for actually wrapping the AI technology around existing staff and kind of making them go further as well, David? That's a quite interesting aspect you just mentioned.
Yeah, so one of the areas that we've been working on with a client is specifically to develop an internally facing chatbot. And so this would be something that they might get a question in from a client, or indeed they might be trying to educate themselves on underwriting frameworks within an insurance company. And rather than speaking to colleagues, trawling through lots of information in disparate places within the firm, they're able to go to this chatbot, which has been trained on internally only focused data, and get that feedback as well. And if I think about the uses of that kind of internal chatbot, in my old life, we dealt extensively with investors, big institutional investors. You would have in an execution process, literally thousands of questions coming through from investors, often highly detailed. Imagine if you're an investor relations team who have this reference tool, and instead of going to see investors with your lever arch file, which is 18 inches thick, and you referring to it, you have an up-to-date, intelligent response, which is nuanced depending on the type of question that's coming in. So those in the external chatbots get an awful lot of press, but we do think there's lots of room for the internal opportunity to be levered more than it is already.
Absolutely. I mean, that feels like something that's quite worth emphasizing, especially when we're talking to kind of the insurance industry itself, is that, customer engagement is important, but, wrapping that technology around the staff is also kind of a massive opportunity. I mean, that's a really useful use case as well as of something that you've built in the past. But maybe I wanted to come to you, DB, about maybe just some other examples of a use case of AI technology that you've built that's really helped an insurance company do something better.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give two examples, one in the underwriting pricing space and then one potentially in the claim space, just to even it out. So in the underwriting pricing space, and this was particularly for a motor insurer, and the sort of use case or question there was, can we build an app that help us to better quantify, select, and price for risk? And we had vast amount of data available, luckily for this. So for the policyholder, we essentially had vehicle and driver information as well as telematics data in order to price the risk. We ended up using a combination of actuarial and AI techniques to model the risk. Very important that we stick sort of to the actuarial principles and not divert too much. But what we ended up using was a deep learning model instead of the conventional linear model. But we built it in a sort of an architecture to ensure transparency and interpretability of the results. And that essentially gave us a risk premium that they can quantify the risk. But we didn't want to stop there, because we wanted the app to essentially give us the end price that we can go to a client with and be comfortable that it's the right price and that it's also marketable. So that forced us to put a layer on top of it, almost like a business logic layer, to ensure that the rates are competitive. And we had competitive market rates for similar risk groups. So we essentially created distribution of what the market charged, and to make sure that whatever our risk premium is, that we are with somewhere in that distribution that it is marketable. So for example, if we predicted with the AI model a really high risk premium, we can discount it up to a certain amount to ensure that we still make enough margin, but that it is marketable at the same time. Or in the other case, where it's an extremely low risk and it's a very low price, that we can actually increase that price and still remain competitive in the market. So that was one example in the underwriting space. And in the claim space, and this, I mean, just for different class of insurance, for pet insurance in this case, the question there was, can we build or can we automate the claims capturing and assessment process? And what we essentially built was an application where assessors would just upload the claim form and vet invoice to this application. We would then use OCR technology to extract the unstructured data into a structured format, and we would have our data science and AI layer on top of that, which essentially uses things like natural language processing to categorize the line items of the invoice and map that to the policyholder to see whether these items should be included or excluded in the claim, and also looked at things like the amount of the related to the items, and to see whether that was actually artificially inflated, and other sort of basic checks and fraud related checks to see whether we can automatically sort of assess this or reject or accept this claim or not. And then what that essentially led the assessor to do was, for the really small claims, we could automatically put that straight through the process. For the large claims or the small or medium claims that had some sort of flags, that would then be sent to the assessor to check further before they essentially accept or reject it. And the benefits of this, of course, was like a massive reduction in turnaround time, as well as subsequently lower costs in the claims process.
Okay, I think what's really interesting about both of those examples that you've just spoke about is that they have quite clear objectives and quite clear use cases for, efficiencies that have been driven within a business. I mean, that's something that I think is quite interesting, and maybe for our participants and attendees today, it's maybe one of the most burning questions, is that when they, as an insurance company, are going and asking their bosses for a little bit of investment to kind of get into this burgeoning technology, one of the questions they are most likely to be asked is, what is it that we're actually trying to focus on? Because it's all well and good saying that we're implementing AI, but there needs to be quite a clear and defined use case, I think. I mean, maybe you could speak to that, AK, from your perspective. Is what is it that insurance companies have to be most focused on when they're having these thick questions?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, almost like a universal question we get asked every time we talk about this. Like, where do we start? What are the use cases? How do we select the right use cases, right? Really valid questions. And the point behind all of this is that when you have new technology, you have to balance two things. You have to balance the risk, compliance, and the feasibility of implementing that technology and rolling it out at a scale. And you have to balance the innovation that you can do and really rethink your business model by using that technology. And those two things, they're not independent of each other. They have to come together, and there's a give and take in bringing these together. So for the biggest advice I have for my clients and for people I speak with, how do we go about finding out the use cases? Start with the lowest common denominator, the biggest problem statements. It's usually a much better return. It almost certainly is a much better return if you fail fast, right? I mean, don't be afraid to fail fast, but start with the use cases that are the most biggest problem statements for your organization. And that brings us to the next point, is that not everything is equally important or problematic for every type of insurer or financial services institution out there. Some have issues with claims, or some have issues with fraud, some have issues with customer complaints, and they're all in different levers that you have to really judge and understand. So implementation of technology is kind of one big issue, but understanding business and understanding where you need to apply the technology, that's where you should start with and start your thinking, thought process from. I mean, it won't be long before someone comes out with a fully automated insurance company that does the entire thing soup to nuts with AI, right? You can envision that. So it's all possible.
Absolutely, the art of the possible, as they say. I mean, would you like to add anything, David, to what AK said there?
Yeah, I think picking up from AK's comments, I think where we see the most value from an initial discussion through to implementation is where the client or we or their consulting firm is helping the client can define the use case very clearly. So they come at it with a very clear sense as to what they're trying to achieve and what the return on that investment looks like. Because again, if we go back to the individuals asking for budget from the CFO, CEO, in any other aspect of that business, there will need to be a clearly defined return on that investment. And so that's a critical part of it. I think there's a people element and a data element. I think the people element is where we find the most hurdles, is where sometimes there isn't clear and total alignment of the stakeholder group at the clients for the entire process. So there may be a disagreement in terms of the use case, the longevity of the process to execute the use case. It might be that the data is in the wrong place and you have people arguing over ownership. So that stakeholder alignment throughout the whole process is absolutely critical.
Okay.
You have people with agency making the decisions in a timely way and being able to iterate quickly that allows the process to move forward, with metronomic success. And then there's the question, and this relates, I think it was Gary on the chat who asked a question around, the dangers of implementing AI too quickly. I think is we talk about executing two specific use cases, but we also come at clients with we call it a platform mindset. So rather than just building a specific use case and then you disappear and that use case hopefully will be used for years to come, you have to ensure that from the most generic perspective, your data's in the right place, the engineering is correct, which allows you to have this bedrock, this foundation on which you can build use cases and iterate them in the future. And I think as long as that platform is built in a robust enough way, you should be able to continue to build use cases on top of it or change those use cases almost without regret as technology develops and new use cases potentially come in or the business expands. And there are other things that may be more pressing to put into the AI pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that flows quite nicely into one of the questions that we've received from one of our attendees. And I wondered whether maybe you could speak to this, DB, but someone has asked about the tipping point between viability in terms of the cost of implementation. And I know you just spoke about kind of future-proofing of businesses there, David, but DB, if you maybe could just speak to that tipping point where it becomes kind of almost necessary that companies invest in this technology.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think all of these, like investment in AI, it comes down to, and I think AK spoke about this earlier as well, around what is a return on investment. And I think whenever you go into, I guess, an AI related project, like you need to do that assessment really well. Like you need to have a very clear understanding of this is the cost that's going in and this is the return that I'm receiving. And if that isn't clear, it's really difficult to justify an AI related project. And for me, I guess the tipping point of viability would be like looking at that equation of value, like what is the cost versus sort of the return. And if it's something that is very sort of profitable, could be very profitable, I would say that is whether you should take it on or not.
Okay, I think that's a good answer to a quite complicated question. I mean, did you have anything you wanted to add there, okay?
Yeah, no, I think it's a tough question. I think the use case that you need to pick needs to resonate with your business and your business need. Technically, technology-wise, all of it is possible and it will be done sooner or later. I think you have to prioritize the right use cases, build the right business case behind it, and get the support of the organization. That's the most important part, right? There's a lot of people involved in almost all of these business processes. And there's a lot of intelligence, not artificial, real intelligence amongst these people, right? So you have to be mindful of that. You have to be mindful of the human, having the human in the loop of this chain of AI that you're envisioning for your business. But yeah, there's some good starting points, and those are, start with the business value, start with lowest common denominator, and start with very thorough approach, like David was saying, on business case and taking this to the full extent, rolling it out fully.
Great. I mean, one of the things you mentioned there as well is, the amount of stakeholders that are often involved in a project like this. And one stakeholder that is often very important in the implementation of any technology in the insurance sector is the regulator. I think that, with the implementation of consumer duty that we're all very aware of in the insurance sector recently, it's one of those things that, we need to make sure that we are complying with regulation while still making sure that our customers are getting the full advantages of any new technology that we're bringing in. I mean, maybe, David, you could speak to kind of making sure that we stay within those guide rails and how AI can help and remain compliant there.
I mean, it's a great question, Yanis, and it's one without a simple answer. Clearly, lots of insurance companies are multi-jurisdictional. They already deal with multiple regulators. And each of those regulators will have a slightly different view on, I mean, things like capital adequacy, for example, or consumer protections. The challenge with AI is clearly you have Europe, which is taking a sort of horizontal approach to regulation. You've got the UK, which seems to be going down a vertical approach where banking, insurance, financial services regulators will be tasked with regulating their sectors, whilst the retail utility sector might be doing something different. So how do you make sure those things are aligned? And then in the US, you have the whole question of federal versus state regulations. So you might have California or Texas who feels they're reasonably well developed in formulating AI regulation, but as yet there's no definitive view from a federal perspective. And so companies and their providers are clearly having to navigate all of those questions as technology advances, as regulation often catches up. And I think that's something that compliance, risks teams, the consultancy firms, and the AI providers themselves have to be acutely aware of. And so that's something that is a constant question for us internally. I'm sure it is for AK and the team at EY. But I think transparency and approaching it from the ethical underwriting perspective, ensuring GDPR regulations that exist today that are adhered to within the context of new technology, all of those things are the best way to ensure that you don't get tripped up as AI regulation begins to cement itself.
Great, thank you. I think there's one extremely important word that you mentioned in relation to regulation there, and that's ethics, and kind of associated issues of transparency around this technology have been quite taken up a couple of column inches recently as this technology has kind of burst onto the scene. I wondered, DB, whether you could speak to those ethical concerns around AI and how those can be managed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's also, it's always a very tricky topic to talk about the ethics around AI. I think the important thing to note in terms of having sort of bias in your models or in your data is that will essentially almost always be the case. Like when you have a specific data set, like you might have historic experience where, for example, males had more accidents in motor insurance, and hence they get sort of charged a higher premium, for example, and that might not be true. And it's less about whether those things are sort of allowed or not, but it's more around like making sure you are aware of it and that you can, I guess, explain that and ask yourself the question: is it ethical to, for example, discriminate against someone based on risk factor X? So I think that's always something to take into consideration in sort of the bigger picture. And it also speaks to a lot of the transparency that I mentioned earlier around when you build models, we need to make sure that it is transparent, so that come the regulator or come the chief risk officer, whoever it might be in terms of stakeholders, that we can very clearly explain as to how our sort of AI models or AI technologies are behaving, essentially.
Absolutely, I think that's really vital. I mean, one question that we've got from the audience as well is also around regulation and about AI being a bit of a barrier to entry. So what they've asked is, given the regulatory framework that the industry is facing, does AI kind of represent an opportunity there for startups and innovators to disrupt a quite established industry and almost reinvent it itself? So I wondered whether maybe AK, you wanted to pick that one up.
Yeah, no, absolutely, my pleasure. No, I think it's definitely the big disruptive opportunity that's out there right now. And look, I mean, we're talking about regulators, we're talking about, you know, the entire world stage coming up to speed on this. It just came to everyone's attention in last 1 year, and now everyone's catching up to it. But let me, you know, honestly, I've seen the regulators are being really, really open and forward-looking when it comes to AI. You know, we work with and we assist a lot of the clients and their relationships with various regulatory organizations across the world, and we're seeing more and more regulators are open to ideas, are open to trialing things out. Some regulators are even putting out their sandboxes for their customers to come in, or their participant firms to come and trial out these some of these ideas and be able to show progress and new ways of doing business, be it pricing, underwriting, claims. I think the world is catching up to it, and taking the first few steps is vitally important for all organizations right now. It's not a barrier. It's not something that you have to wait and see how it evolves. It's something you need to get involved today and help shape it, how it's going to shape the insurance industry, financial services industry. I think you all can play a massive part in that right now, and that's the opportunity it brings. It's not one of those technologies that only some big tech can implement and then we get to see how it pans out. It's us doing this today. So that's very important, I feel.
Okay, I mean, just to kind of pick up and expand on that slightly. I mean, what this, as you mentioned, is this really important technology that I feel that a lot of people are going to be very interested in wanting to implement. But one of the barriers I see to it is that a lot of companies operating in this sector are, so slimmed down because of the competitive element of the market that, they're often so busy that it can feel like a lot to kind of jump into a new technology trend like this. And I wondered whether you've had any experience of dealing with firms like that feel that they're almost too busy to actually implement a technology that could save them time in the future.
That's always the case, to be honest. Any new thing comes in, you have to make a decision. Is it worth investing the time? I think the plus is that the barrier to entry, like someone said on the chat, is actually lower for AI, because immediately all the big clouds have come out with their products that can help you bring AI into your workflows. There's some really big brand names who are coming out with architectures that help you implement this in your organization, like co-pilots and so on. So I feel like this is more of an opportunity than a threat, and it's a place that you have to start sooner than later.
Okay, David, did you want to add anything to that one?
Only in that I think it speaks to a comment we made earlier, which is the stakeholder alignment. What we sometimes find is you may get someone in the C-suite with an amazingly grand ambition, which we all get very excited about, and then it actually hits the folks who are doing all the work internally, and they say, well, number one, there's a bit of hype around it, and number two, we actually have a day job, and so we can't accommodate it. And so it's then that you have to navigate the stakeholder engagement. But also for lots of firms like ours and AKs and others, there's always a spectrum between assisting from a pure augmentation perspective. So do you have people who can help that data science, that AI team internally, all the way through to building these custom solutions and these products entirely by yourself, if it's Explore or other similar firms. And so again, you have to understand exactly who within the firm is directing in which direction and try and get them all aligned in order to get some of these projects through. But in relation to a barrier to entry, I think it depends significantly on what sort of insurance you're underwriting, what the competitive landscape looks like. If you're a really niche insurer focused on a very specific asset class, AI may be beneficial, it may not be beneficial, but is it a genuine barrier to entry? If you were starting a business today, it might not be. Whereas if you are an established entity which is really struggling with things like cost control, it could really well change the nature of your business. And so it really is dependent upon the lines you're writing and I guess the how far along your own route you are in terms of your building of the firm and changing strategy.
Okay, yeah, I think that stakeholder point that you've brought back up again, I think is that alignment between the company and where you're implementing it is very vital, especially the iterative nature of implementing this technology that you do. And I think that's coming quite clearly from all three of you, that it does need to be quite a clear use case when you're implementing something like this. And hopefully the attendees will find something like that very useful. I mean, someone, Janis Tanner, has just asked quite a relevant question that kind of picks up on something that you said there, David, and maybe you could speak to this, DB, is looking forward. I mean, I know you just said, David, that it's not so much a barrier to entry now if you were just starting up a company, but insurance businesses within 5 years, that might be a different case. And I wondered, and it's always difficult to kind of make a prediction, DB, but whether you could just speak to what you see as the scene being like in 5 years.
Oh, that's a really difficult question, but also very easy to get wrong. And I think most people will get it wrong because it's so difficult to know what's going to happen in the last 5 years. We just look at the exponential changes that's happened in the last few years. Like in 5 years time from now, it could be dramatically different. But I do foresee in 5 years time, I mean, there'll be a lot more insurtechs. I think that'll be in the game. That'll either be sort of entities created from like the bigger insurers or the likes of that. But it's really hard to say exactly which technology will be where it will be utilized more or less. But I think AK said it earlier, the sort of value chain or the operations of an insurance company, a lot of that will be, I think, automated. I think when it comes to the risk assessment and underwriting process, I think most of that will probably be, even if it's not pure AI, or if people think about it like the complex algorithms, it'll be rule-based, but it'll all be like automated in a on some sort of easy to use application for new policyholders to sign up, for example. Same with the claims process. I think that's going to, as time goes on, more and more become more and more efficient as time goes on, and automated and less human involvement. Never no human involvement, because I think there's always a part for a human to play in the insurance world, particularly even when it comes to risk selection or just with claims management. But I'm sort of sidestepping the question because it's really hard to give a firm answer. But I do think a lot more of the end-to-end processes of an insurance company will be automated using the technologies.
Absolutely, and I think as we think we both agree on that, you know, it's hard to have a crystal ball and actually predict exactly how things will look. But yeah, I think it's perhaps quite clear that AI will absolutely be a bigger thing than it is now in 5 years' time. Maybe to expand on that question, dive a little bit deeper into it without having to make as many predictions. We could maybe talk about DB, and then maybe the rest of you could jump in afterwards about what the biggest risks or challenges in the development of AI in the medium term are. So, you know, what can we expect to see that would actually trip up that process to it becoming a bigger thing?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the risk selection piece of where AI comes in, it's quite tricky, because if you don't have very good data, you won't have very good models. So I think when you use the sort of machine learning or deep learning algorithms with good data, you get really good outputs. But if people are or companies are going to use AI blindly just for the sake of using it, and they don't have like really solid data that underlies it, I think that's a massive risk to get the risk selection pricing wrong, and those costs will essentially be sort of passed down to the policyholders, right? If they charge for inappropriately, and so I think that's a massive risk. And probably the biggest one that I foresee, especially when it comes to the risk selection space.
Okay, did you have anything you would like to add to that, AK?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, even on the previous question, right, in 2010, when I started dabbling a lot in the cloud, someone asked me that question: would you see in 5 years everyone will be on the cloud and doing all of this? And, you know, and there are still a lot of businesses out there who are not on the cloud, but then again, there are a lot of businesses out there who are on the cloud. And do they have a competitive advantage? Do they have a better cost expense ratio? Probably so, right? It's a very difficult question to answer. But now, where the risk is, I completely agree with DB, right? There's the risk in applying it incorrectly. But I personally feel I'm really passionate about AI and data, and I feel there's a risk of missing out on the opportunity of making a complete, new way of managing certain processes like claims or customer comms and personalization. And surely, sooner or later, these will be done. But the companies and the organization that start on this early would reap benefits, because they will, they will risk technical debt. They will risk doing things which they may have to roll back. But that's part of the learning, because you really quickly can get to a point where you're automating or augmenting. Actually, automating is probably not a really good word here, because like Dee was saying, we're not going to automate a lot of processes, but we will augment with human in center a lot of these processes, and we have to start now.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a more fair look at the kind of medium term, rather than asking us to predict exactly where it will be. I think those challenges that have to be overcome, I think, are the first stumbling blocks that we should be focusing on. And as you've all mentioned quite extensively, it's an iterative process, this development, and it has to be done correctly. Otherwise, it won't necessarily bring the advantages that it's not a magic box, as it were. I'm going to pick up one of the questions from the Q&A because I think it's quite interesting. We've spoken about insurance companies generally, and I think a lot of the insights we've spoken about can be applied to both kind of insurers and suppliers within the industry, and also brokers. But someone's asked, an anonymous attendee has asked, are you seeing many brokers allocating capital to the development of AI systems? Because to my mind anyway, it would seem easier for an insurer to use this technology, but I wondered whether any of you could correct me. Did you want to pick up, David?
I can give my 10 cents and maybe DB and AK a better position, but I think one of the most interesting and regular pieces of analysis that we're asked to do, not only in insurance but in retail, in financial services, is lifetime value analysis. So how does an entity direct its marketing budget, its pricing, depending on long-term behaviors of some of its customers? And when we think about broking and their engagement with other insurance companies, the sorts of questions we often get in the broking space is exactly that. How do I really properly analyze and predict where the most remunerative relationships will come from? And how do I use the data that I have, which is often 5, 10, 15 years worth, to make those lifetime value decisions? So I would say probably in the broking space, that's where we see some significant interest, but I'm not sure, AK or DB, if you have a different view.
I can add quickly. I think look, everyone's looking at this and trying to find what's the size of prize for them. And I think there's a prize for everyone in it. We are doing, or recently have concluded, a strategy engagement for a client like that, where we identified how they can leverage their current data to improve their interactions with their clients and stakeholders. It wasn't really lifetime analysis, although that's really like kind of core use case, but also looking at how else can you monetize that data and create data products out of it that you can share with your community, with your clients, and with your users, with better BI, with better MI, to make the decisions and to help your customers and your clients make better decisions. So that's happening across the board. I don't think anyone's left out of that, and I think that's how it should be. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's quite a clear endorsement of the fact that this technology does have its use cases in all parts of the insurance value chain. We've got a couple of questions that have mentioned specific lines, and maybe we can provide you guys with some answers after that. But one question that's popped up that I think is really interesting, and I think is probably relevant for everybody, is that, look, if someone's attending this webinar, they're at least partially interested in AI and its applications in the business, but not everybody will have that background in the field of AI and implementation of technologies. And I just wondered whether all three of you could maybe provide some insight into what the thought process would be there for someone that's looking to implement this technology into their business. And you've spoken to where they would start, but maybe the kind of approach to it from your perspectives might be interesting. Did you want to start? Sorry,
I can start. Yeah, sure. I can start. No, I think it's there was data science a few years ago, which required you to really understand like algorithms, coding, and like how regression works. And, it was more mathematical. I think with Gen AI, that bar has shifted, and it's more about understanding how to interact with a intelligent agent. And I think it's everyone get involved in this, right? I mean, the easiest place to start would be to go on to ChatGPT and similar websites and start to understand how do you interact on a day-to-day basis, or for small tasks, how do you interact with that algorithm and what kind of response you're getting. Then once you've done that, then you start to realize how you change the prompt will make a difference of the quality of answer you're getting. I think those are the two best places to start with. Start playing with algorithms. So start playing with ChatGPT. If you are into cloud and if you have done a little bit of technology, then AWS, GCP, these are good resources on what to do in AI. And if that sounds too much, then really good place would be online tutorials like on YouTube and so on, Udemy, which really explain very well where to start, what to do, how you can play an active part of this. But all it ultimately comes down to how you can incorporate this thinking into your day-to-day business and even your work life. So keep that in mind, see how you can use it in your day-to-day. And yeah, make a start.
Absolutely. I think that's I've been playing around with a bit of ChatGPT, and it's remarkable if no one's had a chance to do that yet. So yeah, do take AK's recommendation. In terms of that perspective to approaching DB, did you have anything that you'd like to add that you think might be helpful?
Yeah, I think, and I know we focus on AI, so I don't want to drop the mood, but I mean, it's definitely not a silver bullet. I think you need to be quite clear, like you're essentially trying to solve a specific business problem, and sometimes AI is the answer, or AI related technology, and sometimes it's not. So I think you need to be quite clear as to like what the problem is, and then what the possible solutions could be. And like more often than not, if it's something related to automation or predictive modeling, AI could always be a solution. So I think it's important to take that into account and really ask the question whether AI is necessary. And I guess the other very important thing when you're going into an AI related project is to make sure that do you have the business buy-in to have that change management, buy-in to have the change management that might, I guess, need to happen afterwards, because often it really changes the way different processes that works within an insurance company, either in the pricing space, the claim space, the compliance space. So you need to really make sure you have that buy-in at management level, to that if you build something that it is actually utilized within the business, and you don't spend a lot of money doing something that's really cool and it's proved that it could be valuable, but it's not utilized within the business because of that really like high barrier to entry, because of the change management that needs to happen with it.
Okay, I think that change management is something that someone else has just asked about that I think is really interesting, that always comes up in the discussion of AI, especially in the implementation of it with businesses, is that they've asked what are some of the measures the panel has seen taken to address the people impacted by AI deployment. I think the indication there is that there's always a worry that this technology that can make processes more efficient can sometimes lead to people's jobs becoming less relevant. And I wondered whether you could provide a kind of response to how you see that, because I mean I think I have an answer, but I think it'd be interesting to hear from you guys. Did you want to start us off, David?
Yeah, sure. I guess it really depends on what you're using the AI for, what's the use case for. But and I probably would say this, but I'm struggling to think of an instance of solutions that we've built that have, for want of a better phrase, put people out of a job. Some of the chatbots that we've built have done lots of good things to increase the rate of response to clients, the personalization of the response to clients. It hasn't meant that people in call centers, for example, lose jobs. When I think about some of the really cool things that DB and the team have built in the underwriting space, that hasn't put a bunch of actuaries out of a job. What it's helped them to do is to increase their capacity so they can underwrite more within the lines that they're already underwriting, or give them a sense check as to why they might not be underwriting X, Y, and Z, and the model tells them that maybe they should be looking at it. So I think it's been, to our experience so far, a fantastic additional tool, and one that helps tremendously. I think when we think about things like claims automation, what that will do is help people within that claims processing flow process those claims more quickly and more accurately. You know, it won't necessarily mean there is never a human involved in it, to a comment that Devolt made a little time ago. So that's certainly my experience. I don't think certainly within the insurance space, you're going to see a raft of redundancies as a result of a implementation of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's to do with being more competitive rather than, you know, removing the people that can operate the technology. It's
yeah, and improving the personalization of the customer contact, personalization of the underwriting that you're doing, and helping in accuracy.
Absolutely. I mean, did you have anything? I know we're just slightly over time, and we can wrap up after this, but did you have anything to add to that competitive point? Okay.
No, I think that's exactly it. I don't think this is here to automate the whole soup to nuts process. This is here to augment the human, and provide better capability to the customer, better experience, faster resolutions. All of those things are going to get you more customers, because, you know, your firm will be standing out. So I think, yeah, we should all think of this as augmentation, not replacement.
Yeah, I think that's almost a headline to end on, really, isn't it? Is that, you know, this, and I think this discussion has been really interesting, and what has come through quite clearly is that AI, as you say, DB, is not a silver bullet, but is something that, you know, in the future is almost surely going to be something that is going to allow companies to be more competitive, and it's definitely worth exploring. And that doesn't mean that, you know, companies need to have these grand visions that are difficult to implement, but it does require kind of identification, quite a clear use case, and rigor in the implementation of where that goes into the business. And yeah, I think that's a great space to end on. I really appreciate my panelists for joining me today and running us through that. I think that's been quite an interesting discussion. And to all of our attendees as well, I'd just like to say thank you for turning up, and hope you found it interesting. Just a quick logistical point to end on: the questions that we didn't get to, we will be answering kind of post the event, and we will be sending those out to anyone that signed up to. And a recording of this event has been made, so if there were any burning points that you'd like to re-go over, then please feel free to watch us again. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. It's about lunchtime, so go and enjoy that. And thank you again to everybody who's here. So
Thanks very much.
right,
Thanks,
you.
Giannis.
See you later.
Cheers, guys. Bye.